don't get the hype for this. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'll be discussing the 5th season by Jemisin, the first book in the Broken Earth trilogy. Now, I've heard a ton about this book and this series for a really long time. I know it was crazy popular on BookTube a while back. A series that's done something never been done before and won a Hugo for all 3 books of the trilogy, and just supposed to be like crazy good. Has such blurbs as, "These novels are a gift to the whole of our culture." And so, I mean, if you couldn't tell from the thumbnail, I did not feel quite the same about this. So that was really my first reaction to this, is I don't get the hype for this. I really don't. And I don't think this is a bad book. I really didn't care for it for a number of reasons, which I'm going to discuss. But this just really didn't do it for me, and I really don't get the hype. I think this is an okay book. It's not really poorly written, but there are a lot of things that I just didn't really care for. Now, the first disclaimer, and I know this is probably debatable to some, but in my opinion, this is 100% a dystopian YA novel. I know that's not how it was marketed. I know some people would probably disagree, but this really has all of the hallmarks of a dystopian YA novel. It's set in a dystopian world that it's unclear, may or may not be like our world in the distant future or not. But it does a ton of the things where, like, it's got like everyday like stuff from our world, but then they've kind of created other things. It's got the kind of like the magic and like, but it's oppressed and like the people in charge and all the themes of like, it's not right, we need to, rise up, that sort of thing. Really has all the hallmarks of dystopian YA. Including younger characters for the most part, though not all the characters are younger as we're going through here. So that's the first thing is I've said it before, I'll say it again, I don't really care for dystopian YA. It's just not something that I enjoy. And when this immediately opens up and feels like dystopian YA, that's kind of a problem. Now, the other thing I'll mention, because a lot of people have really hit on it, and I know it's really hit or miss, is that this does have a second-person POV, which is pretty odd. It's definitely not normal, and right off the bat, I didn't care for it. Now, I honestly, it didn't bother me as much the further I get. I think partially because subconsciously I wasn't reading it as second person anymore. I was just reading it as this is another POV, and I wasn't really focusing on the second person. But I have to say, I do not think the second person served any purpose at all. It is revealed toward the very end of this book why there's a second person POV. I don't think that made it make any more sense. It seemed wholly unnecessary to me, and really just felt like it was kind of done as kind of the like almost like art house piece of it, which is another reason why I think this probably was so critically acclaimed, is that some of the other themes in there, some of the parts of this read a little bit like literary fiction, and apparently N.K. Jemisin too, I think I said at the beginning, which paper was it, is a reviewer for the New York Times book review. So I feel like connections probably played a big part of this. The fact that this has some literary fiction elements, has that the second person is like the different kind of literary fiction thing. So I feel like people who don't normally like fantasy were like, oh, this is better than normal, all that fantasy crap with the dragons and the mad, and I don't know. I'm speculating, and that is 100% speculation in my opinion, but I wonder if that had something to do with at least the critical acclaim. Though a lot of people really seem to like this as well. And so I do think a lot of it is just my taste. I don't like dystopian YA. That's really what this felt like to me. It felt like really, it was marketed as adult. And I think it's just a YA novel with some adult content thrown in there to make it feel like it's not adult. Like language, child abuse, sexual content, of which there's a fair amount of throughout, including a mix of sexual content and child abuse in there as well. So just a note for that. It's not super prevalent, but it's mentioned throughout and kind of just put as a normal part of this world, which once again feeds into this dystopian YA feel, where that's just kind of where we're at. The language is something that actually really annoyed me too, because language doesn't typically bother me in books, but the problem is here, and once again this goes to the overall point of the setting feeling very muddled, is we have everyday items. We have toilets, we have stuff that you would generally see. I can't remember. I feel like there were references to there being electricity. Yeah, there's definitely electricity. Not everywhere has it. Some places use lamps, but there's like there's some form of electricity, I believe. There's running water. There's other stuff like that. Just kind of normal, everyday things, and then also we're putting a bunch of stuff that's like fantasy-esque, or we're using terms that are like everyday normal, but then we're throwing in these like the made-up fantasy terms, and the mix of that just feels odd to me. And that was something that I really felt odd. Like, we're in a fantasy world, we're talking about magic that involves like the earth and like sensing the movements of the earth, and then there's something that's I can't talk anymore, compared to like cookie sheets, and like, really, cookie sheets is something that's a normal thing. It just felt really strange in this kind of dystopian world. The things that stayed and the things that are completely different. And it's not just language as in cursing, but we did have that where we have like normal curse words in here, and then we have world specific curse words. And once again, the mix is what felt a little odd. I think that can be done well if it's like normal curse words, but they have like, instead of saying like, oh my god, you might use like a god that's from the world, something like that. I think that can work. But we have like replacement curse words that are used. And then we also have normal curse words. So once again, to me, at least, and this is my opinion, the normal curse words fit better for the YA part of it. And then I feel like real curse words were put in once again to make it feel more adult. It's just kind of how it came off to me. When everybody uses this particular vernacular, but then all of a sudden we're just using regular, our curse words too, it just didn't really fit. I had some issues with just some of the terms that really annoyed me. The first one being comms, which is short for community, and it's just comms is used. I associate that kind of like shortening, like slang thing with YA as well. I haven't read a huge amount of YA, so I don't know if that's true, but that's something that kind of added to the overall piece for me. The one that really annoyed me is the use of the word cess. When you're cessing something, it's used 100% interchangeably with the word sense, except it's apparently short for the cessipene, or however you pronounce it, which is like a different brain organ that the magic users have, basically. So it is short for that. It's like that helps a little bit, but you're using the word cess when you could absolutely just use the word sense. Every time they talk about they're cessing something, they're sensing something. They're using a different sense, but they're sensing something. And so just kind of like throwing that in there is another really minor thing that just kind of annoyed me about the language, the way that it works. So that was a lot of it, was the style. Like I said, most of my complaints, I feel like, are complaints of the dystopian YA setting of the book. But also, nothing about this felt original to me or fresh at all. I felt like this is a story I've read before. The magic system maybe was more detailed than some, but an earth-based magic system is something we've seen a bunch of times, and that's fine. Once again, the way this is talked about as just being this innovative novel, I didn't get that at all. It's another YA dystopia novel. It has all the trappings of that. It does all of the same things, including characters making dumb choices because they think they know better, not believing things come back to bite them. It has, for a part of it, the kind of the school setting, which has a lot of the normal things that happen at like a school setting. Just all of the dystopian kind of feel is absolutely there. There are some parts that were interesting because there were some POVs where they're traveling. Some of the dialogue I thought was good. Other parts, some of the world that we look at is interesting. Once again, it all just kind of comes back to that YA feel. With that as well is the fact that, to me, pretty much all of the characters act like teenagers. They talk and act like teenagers no matter how old they are. If they're younger than a teenager, they still act like a teenager. If they're 40, there's literally a character who's confirmed to be 40, acts like a teenager the entire time. We meet other adult characters, all of which just really seem to act like teenagers. Doesn't matter what they are. Bureaucrats act like petty teenagers. People who are in charge of this or that, or like really powerful magic users, act like teenagers. And that was something that really annoyed me as well. There wasn't really a whole lot of maturity. It was just everybody acting like a teenager, including, once again, when it didn't make sense because they were much too old or even too young to really act that way. That was kind of where I got with this. So that's kind of the bulk of like just talking about the tone, the language, the setting. issues I had with this. Like I said, I think the book does do what it's trying to do, but it's just felt really muddled with all of the YA elements and then trying to throw in other stuff to be like, no, this is more than just YA, dystopian novel number 411. This is something completely different. It did start to set up some things, and I think there are some interesting elements here. And the thing is, I have to repeat again, because like I said, this is mostly a rant, but I didn't hate this book. And I, at first, really early on, I felt like I wanted to DNF because I got hit with all the things I didn't like. But there were enough interesting elements to keep me going. And this was a really quick read for me too, I will say. This was very easy to get through. I was not a challenging read. Part of that too, with the whole YA being marketed as adult thing, is it's pretty liberal spacing and font, which adds to that page count. Having a glossary, having the book preview at the back. I've noticed books will do that when they're really not that long, but they want to make it feel like they're longer. So this really, it was not a particularly long story. It was easy to get through, and it was generally well written, is the thing. So when I was trying to rate this at first, I think I gave it on Discord like 2 3/4 stars, because I really didn't want to put this at a 3-star, because for me a 3-star should mean I liked the book, and I did not like this book. But it's not a 2-star book, which would be I just simply didn't like this. I didn't like it, but I think a lot of it was more the style, what it's doing, and just the complete meh factor. Like, I didn't hate this book, I wasn't invested in this book at all. It didn't do enough to pull me in and actually make me care. I did enough to like keep my interest and keep me from just DNFing the book, but that's not really enough for me to make me want to continue a series. This is not a series I will be continuing, despite already owning the second 2 books in the trilogy. And honestly, tell me if maybe I still should, but at this point, I don't think I want to read any more N.K. Jemisin, just because, once again, this is hyped up as an amazing book, and her style is amazing, and if this is her style, and this is what I'm going to find in her other books, I'm not interested. So this really kind of, for me, is probably the last N.K. Jemisin book I'll read, at least for quite some time. Like I said, nothing about this was bad to make me like, oh, this is terrible, I don't want to read this author. It's just, nothing about this really worked for me. I didn't really care. Anytime like a part seemed interesting, it was just kind of throwing some other element that I'm like, really? This is what we're doing? And some of it was just such a stretch, too, was the other big problem plot-wise. Like, there was somewhat of an interesting plot going on, but so much of the plot relied on, well, this person or thing is going to be here or happen specifically now because the plot needs it. And I'm just expected to really believe that it just happened to work out that way. And it's just plot convenience after plot convenience. And as it goes further, it becomes more and more of a stretch. Like, a character does something really stupid. 2 characters, actually. One character allows the stupid thing to occur, and the other character does the stupid thing. And it's so dumb. And, like, I don't understand why these characters would be so dumb as to do this. But it was needed because that was the only thing that would allow the plot to get where it needed to go. There's lots of other times where just so-and-so randomly happens to show up, and that's what solves this. Or just times where, like, oh, you know, there's, and I don't want to get into any spoiler here, but there's literally a plot line, too, where we find out that, like, someone's been tracking and watching a character for, like, 20, 30 years or something. And has just been able to do that. And there is a very minor explanation as to why, but it still just comes off as like, really? It was such a stretch, and there were just a lot of things like that, where, like I said, the book wasn't bad, but it's just, even the good elements weren't great, and there was so much where it's just plot convenience after plot convenience, throwing in more dystopian YA elements, going back to trying to like explain nothing and explain some things. And I feel like that's really another thing too, where this book tries to explain very little to make it seem more mysterious and interesting, but what it really does is just the little it does explain is not nearly enough to make it believable to me that these things are going to happen. And I imagine a lot of the questions that were specifically kind of posed in this will be answered in the rest of the trilogy. Once again, nothing in this book did enough to make me care about it. So, 5th season, not a terrible book. I don't think this was poorly written. It was not a style I enjoy. It did a lot of things I very specifically do not like, and just kind of felt muddled and like it didn't know where it wanted to be. And I don't know if this was Jemisin's first book or not. So once again, let me know if maybe like it does some of her other later works maybe are better. Let me know if there's any that you would recommend based on me not liking this. I have no interest in finishing the trilogy though, and so that's one of the other reasons too. I was getting through this quick, and I didn't want to DNF it and then unhaul the whole trilogy. And people were like, "Oh, well, if you would have gotten to the end, you would have enjoyed it." Because no, the end really did nothing for me. The last line specifically jumped super dystopian YA to me. Is the last line of dialogue of the book. And like I said, there were some reveals. Like it explained why we have second person. Fully revealed the twist, and which I thought the twist was fairly predictable as it was going on, because there was a lot about the plot lines in the book that just seemed very inconsistent, and then some of it that just seemed strange, and so it kind of made it, I felt like, pretty easy for me to figure out what was going on. I really figured out the twist, I guess, I feel like fairly early. When it revealed it, it was like, yeah, I figured that was probably the case. And then when it fully revealed more about it, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense as well, based on all of these things. So it was another thing where I feel like Jemisin was trying to like weave this whole thing together, and it just wasn't done well enough to make it compelling for me. I found it pretty easy to determine, and the explanations I thought didn't do a lot to make me care. So that's kind of where I landed on this. Like I said, let me know your thoughts. I know a lot of people do love this book, and so I'm sure there'll be some disagreement, but I would honestly be interested to hear if people thoughts. Like if you specifically disagree with things that I said, or you really enjoyed some of the elements I didn't like, be interested to hear from you on this. And I'm sure there's some other people who weren't a huge fan of this either, but this just really did not work for me. Like I said, if you like dystopian YA, absolutely read this. It's well written, and if you like that genre, I think you'll enjoy it. So that's really the readers I would recommend this for. But if that's not your thing, you may find similar to me that you didn't really care for it. So that's kind of where I'm at, but I'd be curious to hear everybody's thoughts on this book or the trilogy. Let me know your thoughts, of course, down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like. Check the link in the description for a link to the Wizardly Duo Discord if you want to join and chat books, or really anything at all. Always a ton of discussion going on there, and it is a fun time. We'd love to have you. And of course, if you'd like to see more of my content, make sure to subscribe.